everyone, and welcome to another episode of Annie Talks, where we bring to you interesting stories about interesting people that you want to know about. I'm your host, Annie Rivera. Thank you for tuning in, and to those who have already subscribed. If you're new to the podcast, welcome, and I hope you enjoy what you hear. And if so, I personally invite you to subscribe. Annie Talks is brought to you by Luxwear Trends, affordable, luxurious timepieces for every occasion, luxury that lasts forever, and that's what sets us apart from others. Find us on Facebook and Instagram or visit luxweartrends.com. That's Luxe weartrends.com. My guest on this episode is Mike Pecci, a critically acclaimed award-winning film director. With over 18 years of experience, Mike has cemented a name for himself, not only as a photographer and music video director, but as an abstractly edgy filmmaker who is undeniably devoted to the art of storytelling. His characters are the faces of his work. Passionate, emotional, and distorted stories are the basis for some of Mike's most well-received films. His ability to touch audiences through his films is a credit to his commitment to understanding humanity. The work has an emotional quality that can both frighten and pull you in, playing off the darkest chasms of the human condition. Here now is my conversation with Mike Pecci. Hey, Mike, thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
Well, thank you. Truly appreciate it. So now for everybody else who do not know who Mike Pecci is, give a sense of who Mike Pecci is and your background and basically just kind of how you became who you are now. And we'll talk a little bit about more on the filmmaking side, but let's talk about Mike Pecci now.
Who am I? That's the $1,000,000 question, right?
Yes.
I am a film director. I have been directing films, music videos, commercials for about 18 years. You may have seen my work in the music video world if you're into heavy metal music and hardcore music. I started with my business partner, Ian McFarlane, years ago, making music videos for bands like Killswitch Engage. We wrote treatments for Ozzy Osbourne. We did stuff for the Wu-Tang Clan, that kind of thing. And we were in that for quite some time until the music video business sort of became very difficult to make money in. And we transitioned into doing commercial stuff. And throughout the entire process, I have always been trained to be a filmmaker. And so I have been doing short films for years. A bunch of, like, my stuff tends to be kind of thriller horror stuff.
Right.
And then, like I said, I was also a photographer for a while too. That was in there. So I did a bunch of photography and stuff. So sort of a jack of all trades for years, because that was the only way to learn while making money.
Is that how you started out, was a photographer first and then a filmmaker? So actually, that's a good segue. Let's talk about that now.
Sure. I started initially wanting to make films. And so I'm actually wearing the shirt. Look at me plugging these guys. I went to New York Film Academy back in like 1999, I think. And I went and I took a directing course at their headquarters, which was in New York, and learned. I was forced to make at least 3 films in my time there. So I learned quickly how to produce. And I moved to a city that I had no family, no contacts, and got thrown in with a group of people that I didn't know. A really great class of people. Like one of the kids that I was in school with ended up being a producer at NBC. Another guy ended up going to like one of the biggest trailer cutting studios. He cut the trailer. I think he worked on the Matrix trailers and all that. We all got thrown into this program at New York Film Academy where they teach you quickly how to make movies. And this was back pre-digital, so we were shooting stuff on film, and we were doing like old black and white 16 millimeter stuff, and then actually cutting and pasting
Oh my gosh.
all that. So it was a really cool learning experience. Like I said, it taught me how to produce, which I still use a lot of those skills now, and it taught me how to really sort of embrace the chaos that is this life.
Well, I love your work, and I've always been a fan of your work. And then we met a while back while I was working for a monitor display company.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've always seen your work and a big fan of your work.
Oh, thank you.
Well, of course. So now talk about the kinds of films that you like, and as a fan viewing them, and as a filmmaker. So let's talk on the fan side, and then we'll talk about the filmmaker side.
I've always enjoyed the fact that movies, at least when I was growing up, and I think they still are that way now, movies were one of the best ways to disappear out of your world into a whole new place. And when I grew up, it was really before they had a lot of behind the scenes stuff. So you never really thought about how a movie was made. You just sort of watched it, and suddenly you're hanging out with Indiana Jones. It didn't make any sense. You didn't question it. At least I didn't question it. And talk about suspension of disbelief. Like, I was totally involved with it. So much so that I didn't think I was going to get into. I didn't even know it was a job. And
Right.
It wasn't until I got older, and I originally went to school for radio, which I learned quickly was not for me, which is ironic because now I do podcasts.
Yeah, that's really funny.
And then I decided I was just taking sort of like a baloney class where I just needed some credits, and I took a film course. And I sat and I watched movies. I saw like Citizen Kane for the first time. We watched Blade Runner, and the professor at the time was like, "Hey, so there's a guy in charge of doing all of the photography, and there's somebody in charge of doing wardrobe, and there's somebody in charge of doing all this stuff." And it light dawned on Marblehead, and I was like, "Oh, this is actually an industry that is interesting." So let me get back to your question. So what kind of movies do I like to watch? I'm in love with how films are a visual storytelling medium. So
Right.
I love the idea that you can take a wide shot and 2 close-ups and create a whole new world. And so the stuff that I tend to like to watch are very visually oriented films, like directors that are visual storytellers.
Mm-hmm.
So, the greats to me, Ridley Scott is amazing. So like
Right.
any of his movies, I love John Carpenter. I love David Fincher. These directors that really tell a story with the lens and with
Yeah.
how they move the camera. And I guess the genre for that tends to fall into sort of the horror, sci-fi horror thriller thing. I joke about this often, where I say that I'd either direct horror movies and thriller movies, or I direct romantic comedies, because they both have the same sort of audience interaction.
Yeah.
Like I could spend so much time getting you down a hallway and having you scared to death as the person sort of reaches for a doorknob and pull that door open. And if you're watching it with an audience, everybody's in the crowd and they're all, oh, and you're feeling all these beats that you designed. And then I got dragged to some real cheesy romantic comedy, and I was watching the same thing happen, but for that, where everybody was, and there's
Yeah.
like the girl is like falling for the guy, and the music swell's really working. And I feel like both those genres are great movies to make for an audience and a watch with an audience. And that's kind of why I do it. I'm not one of these filmmakers that, thinks I'm not a dictator, and I don't have some crazy story that I want to tell. I just like the act of telling stories. I like the art of getting you involved with film.
That's interesting that you should say that, because in college, my major was public relations, marketing, that kind of thing. And then for a minor, I decided I wanted to stay kind of in the mix of broadcasting. So I ended up taking radio, TV, film. So I did a radio show, learned how to do radio, did film, and some little bits of film. My film was like nothing compared to your filming or your filmmaking. But it's interesting because it wasn't until then that when I took a few of those courses, that you learn all the POVs, the point of views, and the different camera shots and the angles. And now when I'm watching a film, when I'm watching a movie, I can't remove myself from that. I can't remove myself from watching, oh gosh, look at that angle. Oh, look at that great over the shoulder shot. And then sometimes I'll go back and I'll watch it again because I want to watch it from a different perspective, from a fan side now, and not, worry about how the shot was made or how the movie was made. So I'm critical first and then I'm a fan later. So it's interesting that because of the line of work that you do, yep. And this is how I became such a fan of yours, is because everything that you were doing, I said, oh my gosh, well, he should be teaching this class. I wish I would have taken his class instead of, somebody else's class or, that kind of stuff. So you were the epitome to me of the perfect filmmaker. So,
stop.
To you. No, seriously. I'm very truthful about what I said. It's just, I love what you do. So, which is why I was really excited to have you on the show. And I wanted to talk about the kind of work that you do.
Sure. And I would just jump into that bit there where I felt the same way for a little while. Like when I started to study cinema, I got really excited about the techniques behind cinema. And I would watch movies and sort of try to examine everything from continuity down to like camera positioning and camera movements and blocking. And the audience doesn't realize, a majority of the audience doesn't realize the amount of stuff that physically goes into one single shot. And when you're studying those things, it's almost like studying food and taste and the power of taste. And there hit a point where it started to ruin movies for me. And really? I couldn't watch a film without seeing all that. And I had to go through this process of training myself to not look at that stuff. So now when I watch movies, I try to have the perspective of like 15-year-old me when I watch these things. And then afterwards, if I think it's really great, then I will, rewatch it again and go, oh, how'd they pull this off, and sort of examine it. I think the unfortunate thing is that we're in a great place, I guess, where there's so many outlets for this stuff and there's such a need for content. There's such a call for content that there's a lot of good stuff and great stuff, but there's a lot of trash too. And I think when you start to watch something and you are distracted by the outfit or by, the camera work, then it kind of sucks because you're not enjoying the movie, and the movie you shouldn't be distracted. Everything that we do in film should be silent, and that you don't see us. And if there is a voice there, it's a stylistic voice that suits the story. You know what I mean? So
seamless transition for everything.
Yeah.
So now, we know you direct, but do you write as well? Do you do any of the writing?
I do. I have. I've written most of my shorts, if not all my shorts, except for the new one that we just did that I haven't been able to tell anybody about.
Okay.
But I have done the writing in the past. I'm now teaming up, now that I'm getting into doing features, and I have 2 in development right now. I teamed up with a writer who's much better than me. And here's something interesting. Like, as a filmmaker, it's a very social job.
Right.
So a lot of people assume that if you're the director, you know everything. Like, you have this grand vision and you have everything on lockdown. Like, I wake up tomorrow and I go, boom, World War II movie. I know it all, That's not the case. I mean, you come up with a great idea, you come up with a vision, and it is in your prep, and it is in your initial need to tell that story. Like, why do I want to tell the story? And what is my perspective on this story? And that's what makes it worth me directing, is if I have that. And then I team up with folks. And I've learned over the years that the best thing in the world to do is to put people on your team that know more than you do about these other skills, because there's so many jobs on a film. There's so many hats to wear. And I used to try to do all of it. So I would write, I would shoot, I would edit, I would produce, I would direct, I would do all that stuff. And some of them were really great. But when I started to collaborate with people bring ideas. And they bring ideas that I would never think about, because I will give them a problem that will get filtered through their life experiences, through their work experiences, through everything that they have. And they'll come up with this shiny little thing that I've never seen before.
Wow.
And it's my job as a director to go, yes, that is perfect. Put it in the movie. And if it fits the vision, then let's ride with it. And so that's why I have a great writer now, because I teamed up with this dude, Will Simmons, who has written the feature version of my short 12 kilometers. And he's working on the feature version of the new one right now. He's a much better writer than I am. Writing in itself is its own job. And it's not just putting pretty words down on a page and getting a screenplay. And that's hard enough as it is. Getting a screenplay that is worth getting people to read. He also knows the business really well. He knows how to communicate with studio execs. He knows how to communicate with other creatives, and he's fast. So it was the best decision I've ever made.
So I watched a short segment that you did a few years back, the making of 12K. Can you talk about that and a little bit of how you were dealing with some organisms and the way in which you made them jump and move? Talk a little bit about that if you could.
Sure. I mean, do you know the reason why I made 12K? Did I ever tell you that?
No. I'd love to hear that. Oh my gosh, all these nuggets I get to hear right now. I'm so excited. Yay.
All right. Well, so a few years ago, I would say, I'm so terrible with math. I'd say it's probably like 5 years ago. No, I think it's 5. I started dating this girl. And we would go on a few dates, and we had been friends previously, and we started a date, and she started to hound me about going ice skating. Now at this time, I was like 35, and I'd never put ice skates on in my life. in my life.
What a sight.
And so I said to her, like, I kept blowing her off. Yeah, sure. We'll get to that. And then that one afternoon comes up where she says, you never do what I want to do. And so, of course, all right. And so then you're like, okay, so what's the worst that's going to happen? I'll twist an ankle or whatever. So I live out in the East Coast. I live in Boston. And so it was wintertime in Boston. Downtown Boston has like this beautiful sort of like When Harry Met Sally type ice skating rink. And so we go down for this romantic date, and I slap on these ice skates, and I'm walking around like an idiot because I don't know how to do it. I have no sense of balance. So she pulls me out on the ice, and she's pulling me around on the ice, and I start to get frustrated. They're like little 5-year-old kids sort of pirouetting around me and doing their thing.
Running circles around you.
Yeah. And so I said to her, like, look, here's the deal. I got to figure this out. You're just pulling me around. So go skate off. I'll figure it out. So she's like, are you sure? And I go, yeah. And so she goes and skates away, and I watch this little kid sort of push off and sort of get out to skate. And I go, okay, I'll do the same thing. So I go and I push, and I slip, and I go completely backwards, and I land on my head, the back of my head. And the last thing I hear is the sound of an old oak barrel cracking, and I'm out.
Oh my goodness. Ouch.
And, out. I'm out. And she tells me afterwards that everybody on the rink heard it. And then the people that own the rink came over, and they skated over, and I'm out cold. And she's trying to convince them to call an ambulance. And they're actually bringing out little orange cones to stick around me so that they don't have to close the rink, so that people continue to skate.
Right.
So I go to the hospital, and I wake up in the hospital, and a doctor's looking down at me, flashing a flashlight at me. And I wake up and I go, oh my God, I've like broken my leg. I've done something. And I've never taken a break from work. So in my head, I'm just sort of running through like, oh, I got all this stuff I got to do. And God, I got a broken leg. And the doctor looks at me and goes, okay, here's the deal. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. You've cracked your skull. You're bleeding internally. You have a hematoma forming on your brain. We can't let you go to sleep, because if you do go to sleep, you might not wake up. you should call your parents.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up at death's door. I was in intensive care for about 5 days, and your dog is going crazy. and heard me talking about it. So now it's
Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I thought you weren't going to hear that, but that is so hilarious.
No worries. So I was in intensive care for 5 days. I ended up recovering, and the bleeding stopped, but I was in 5 months of like concussion and everything else. I was out of work for 5 months.
Oh my goodness.
In those 5 days in intensive care, I started to have these crazy hallucinations, and I started to see shadows that were moving. I started to hear a voice in my head that didn't belong to me. And I was really excited about it because I like horror movies. So I had the girl that I went on a date with, who stayed with me the whole time. There's recordings of me on her phone where I would just go, hey, record this. I just went through this. And I would wake up and tell her like, oh my God, my voice doesn't belong to myself. And so afterwards, when I was home recovering, I basically, it's like one of those near-death experiences where you sort of assess your life and you try to figure everything out. Right. I had a pretty good life. You know, I had a good career up to that point, good family that loved me. The only thing I didn't do was make a feature film. And so I came out of that going, I'm going to write a movie. I've got this great idea for a movie about a guy who can't trust his own voice. And I needed to come up with an origin story for how this guy got infected with this thing.
Oh, wow.
And years ago, I had read about this Russian drill team back in the 1980s that dug the deepest hole known to man. And there was this myth going around that they had lowered microphones down into the planet, and they heard the sounds of people screaming in the planet. And so I always loved that story, and it was a good origin for my idea. And so I sort of dug deep into that. And when I recovered, I came back and I was like, I'm making a movie, and I had to do what I call a proof of concept film, which is usually like a short film that you show studios in order to get them on board.
Sure.
And so I made a 30-minute proof of concept movie about that Russian drill team. It's all in Russian.
Oh,
I
wow.
do not speak Russian. Which was an exciting adventure. And it takes place in the 1980s. And I shot it right outside of Boston.
Wow.
So it was a fun shoot.
Wow, that is so cool. And so that are we able to see that, or?
I haven't been able to release it online officially, but
Okay.
if you write to me, you can either write to me, Mike Pecci at Gmail, or you can write to me on Instagram. And what I've been doing is telling people, tell me your favorite horror movies. And if I like the horror movie, then I'll send you my movie so that you can see my movie. Because I can't release it now because we are in the process of making the feature. We just got a major Hollywood production company with a big time director on board to produce it. And I'm going to direct it. And so we're attaching talent right now.
All right, no problem. Well, you know, when it's closer to release date, or you know where we can start to see it or view it, just let me know, and I'll make sure that we have the links to those, or you know, we have some information on that and get it promoted for you. So
sure. And I haven't sent it to you. I'll send it to you. You haven't seen it yet, huh?
No, I've only seen maybe the promo that we were showing at the trade shows. So I only have that piece.
Sure, I'll send that so that the audience can be jealous because you see it. Well, just write to me, and then I'll probably send it to you.
Oh my goodness! Yes, please do. Please. Now, speaking of which, we talked a little bit earlier about the type of film that you like to do, like you like to watch. I want to know how you came up with your the title "In Love with the Process," and it's kind of you documenting kind of the life behind, or the life of a filmmaker, and you're also you're talking about that in your podcast. Can you talk about the two of those right now? I mean,
sure.
Tell us about that.
Ultimately, I started to do a podcast because here's what's so. I turned 40 a couple days ago.
Oh,
which is
happy
cool.
birthday.
Thanks.
I think I said happy birthday to you, didn't I? I
I,
did.
I think you did. Yeah. So
I'm on it.
we're still good friends. It's fine. So I just turned 40, but a really strange thing happened because I've been basically working as a director and trying to learn how to do in this business since I was, my early 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And this really interesting thing happened when I crossed the 30 threshold, where suddenly I was getting calls and getting recognized for my work. People were calling and asking me to submit to festivals. And then I had a lot of young filmmakers writing to me or coming up to me at seminars and asking me a lot of serious questions about like how to survive, like how would you do this, or how do you deal with your clients, and how do you handle this. And there is a ton of tutorial stuff online about like how to unpack a camera, how to use this thing. You can YouTube the hell out of all that stuff.
Right.
But that to me is really the work of manufacturers that need to sell products.
Mm-hmm.
And, gear is an important aspect of what our business is, but a lot of folks don't talk about how you actually survive as a freelancer. Like when you decide that you're not going to take a job, when you decide that you're not going to have a 9-to-5 job and you're going to do this full time,
right.
There's a lot of stuff that people don't teach you about, like how to manage your money,
right?
How do you deal with taxes, like how do you line up work and consistently line up
right.
work. And there's like a trend of a lot of new freelancers is that you'll get a big paycheck. You'll do something and you'll get like a big hunk of change. And the first thing that you do as a newbie is you're like, I'm going to go buy a camera. I'm going to go do this. I'm going to buy new clothes. I'm going to do all this stuff. I'm hot stuff now because I'm getting paid for this. And then, a month goes by and no one's calling you and you're broke again. And so you really have to, I always say it's like being a squirrel collecting nuts. You really have to sort of stack a certain amount of cash behind you, at least to cover your for at least 5 months, at least.
Right.
Just so that you can continue to develop and continue to go. And that's what the In Love with the Process show is about. It's about how to stay motivated. It's about how to survive as a freelance artist. And it isn't just filmmaking. It's also photography. It's actors and actresses, all that sort of stuff. And I've always wanted, as a young filmmaker, I always wanted access to somebody who was just starting to make it. And I have a lot of really interesting things coming down the line right now. And I've been in a lot of interesting situations, the stuff that I never really knew how to handle. To the point when I did those things recently, I just sort of went in the room and went, okay, and sort of felt my way through it, because they don't teach you that. If you go to a film school, you're not getting that. They're teaching you how to use the equipment. And they're teaching you, if you're lucky, they're teaching you how to interact on sets. But our business is very much like an apprenticeship business, where you go in and you work and you learn more by doing. You actually learn more by physically creating something than you do sitting in a classroom. And there is film theory and there is story theory, and all those things are really important, but it's not a 4-year thing for school. And so I wanted to create this podcast so I could give folks access to that, and also make it entertaining for people who like my films, who like the stuff that I do, to see what my life is like, because it's very surreal. And you find yourself, whether you're doing, like I'm doing a documentary right now with a good friend of mine on barbershops, and it's giving us access to some really amazing, rough inner city barbershops, and I get to go hang out with these folks. And it's a completely surreal experience. And that's on one hand. And then on the other hand, I'm doing chef's pieces and cooking stuff where I get to go and hang out with amazing chefs and see their obsession with food and see their obsession with that. Or we're doing a music piece where, we're catching up with a top of the line musician, hanging out in their tour bus and learning what it's actually like to be a musician today. And so I got a lot of good access, and I figured that doing a podcast that allowed an audience to get the same access and to learn from that access, I'll just tell you how it is.
Yeah.
or how it is, how I've experienced it, and then hopefully you take something from that.
That's awesome. So not only do you teach kind of um, maybe life experiences or from the life experience standpoint, the business side, how to handle your business, how to handle this, how to handle that, but you also teach or you also talk about the actual process of filmmaking.
Mm-hmm.
Do you not? Because I think I've listened to a few of your podcasts, a few of your episodes, and I've also seen a lot of your posts on Instagram. And if you guys aren't already following Mike Pecci on Instagram, you should, because let me tell you, first of all, he puts these wonderful clips on there. And there are things like action shots on how they set up camera gear or rigs for action shots, and it's amazing. And this is the kind of stuff that I love to see, and I'm sure that the wealth of information that you have and you're sharing with listeners, audiences, and followers I'm sure they're soaking it all in. And so now talk a little bit about more of the technical stuff. Before I forget, I wanted to ask you about a documentary long time ago. You were on an actual ride along for a ride along for a gang out in Boston.
Yes. Yeah. I shot a doc for the same director who's doing the barbershop stuff. He's really one of the only directors that I still do cinematography for. We did a film called This Ain't Normal, was what the title was of it ultimately. And it was about the city of Boston's gang problem. And Boston has like 125 gangs, I think.
Wow.
In the city. And a lot of these gangs, it's a fascinating thing because the city is so congested. And so a rough neighborhood will literally be a block away from some of the highest real estate.
Isn't that funny? Yeah.
In the Northeast. And these gangs were started back in the 80s, like late 70s and the 80s. And the names and sort of the gang stuff has stuck around since then. But a lot of these kids are brought into a gang because they're born on a street. So like if you're born on like Wood Avenue, like you're in Wood Gang, and without even knowing that you're in that gang. So it's an interesting doc. We ended up following around this group of street workers that basically would act as like father figures for these young kids and do like everyday tasks. Because a lot of these homes are broken homes, and then these kids live in like really crappy places, and their parents have to work real hard. And if it's a single mom, she's doing 15 hours a day. And so these kids, instead of staying in their crappy apartments, go out into the street. And so all their problems are brought out into the street. Like all of their entire life exists on the street. And then as they get older, they're introduced to drugs, and they're introduced to the ability to make money selling drugs, because it's like the most lucrative opportunity that is offered to someone at that age, from that community. And so there's this group of street workers that would go into that community, act as liaisons between gangs. So they would actually go in and talk on behalf of different gangs to try to like settle any sort of stress. But they would also do regular like, hey, you should get your eyes tested because you need glasses. Or like, hey, is anybody going to drive you to get your driver's license today? Or, hey, have you ever thought instead of going to McDonald's to buy that, I could show you how to, make a great pasta meal that's going to be even cheaper. So it was a fascinating piece. It's in the process of getting distribution now. But I think there's a trailer on Vimeo. So if you look up This Ain't Normal, the director is Rudy Hippolyte. It's really cool. It was fun. We were embedded with these kids for on and off for like through 2 years, something like that.
Right. Wow. Okay. So I'll have all that information down below in the show notes, so everybody, you can check that out as well. Now let's go back to In Love with the Process on the technical side. So what is an example of what you might talk about a segment or an episode that you would probably talk about on your episode, for listeners who have not tuned into your podcast? What can they expect, and what type of lessons or teachings would you offer them?
It really sort of ranges at this point, because I'm trying to figure out, through the process of doing it, trying to figure out what sticks the best.
Right.
But we've done everything. My first 5 episodes were with myself and my assistant, who was getting into the business, and I wanted to have somebody there who was asking me these questions on a daily basis to really sort of drive the podcast. And so for a while, I was teaching him about film school. I was teaching him about producing, and we talked about like how to make a music video. We talked about how bands actually receive music video treatments. It was very technical for like the first, I'd say, 3 episodes. And then I started to break it out a bit more and open it up into hanging out with the folks that I know, hanging out with these different people. So some of the episodes would talk about lighting, but then I would have other episodes with amazing composers and musicians. And then I just recently did an episode on inspiration and how I use food as like a trigger for memories. So if I'm trying to write a character, or if I'm trying to come up with a great idea, and you hit that wall, like every time you sit down to do something, there's always that wall that you hit where it's like, I have no good ideas. Like, where does it come from? One thing that I love to do is I'll go downstairs and I'll cook, and I'll actually pull out certain ingredients and I'll eat certain things to trigger memories from my past. Because one of the things to do if you're writing, or you're a new writer, is you write what you know.
Right.
You always go back to like folks that you know, people that you've met, and you sort of incorporate them into your new idea. So I did like a really experimental episode, which is really beautiful, about memories and food. We sound design it, so like it's almost like my mom was funny about it. She's like, it's almost like a book on tape. So it's like this really cool emotional thing. So it's very inspirational. And then I just did a new podcast on this dude, Steve Geralt, who's this amazing like scientist, engineer, photographer that designs like these cool robots that help him get his photos right.
Right.
And then my new episode is actually me sitting down with my mother.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and that one comes out, I think, next week, and we do a whole episode about how I grew up, how my mother influenced my movies that I liked, because she loved action and she loved violent movies. So at like 13 years old, she'd take me to Die Hard, and she'd take me to like these pretty intense action movies. And she was a photographer, like a amateur photographer. She'd take pictures of the kids and people. And then as I got older and I started to get into the business, I would have her come on set with me. So she was one of my photo assistants for years. And then she comes on set on my movies. And she's got a really funny perspective on the stuff I do. She's like my harshest critic.
I was just going to ask, is she your hardest critic? She probably is, yeah.
Besides
yourself, yeah.
She doesn't hold anything back at all.
Well, see, and that's probably a testament, I would say, to how the filmmaker that you are, the successful and the best, in my opinion, one of the best filmmakers out there, because of your mother, right? Because she lit a fire under you, basically, and just kind of said, it's just, Mike, there's probably something better, right? Or push you to be your best. And I love that. I think mothers are like that all around. I think it's, they don't want to see their children fail. They want to see them succeed. And whatever we could do as mothers to be able to give, you the right tools, proper tools, and the best tools to move forward and be successful. Hey, that's kudos to your mother. Awesome.
I think you'll dig the episode. Like it actually goes to an interesting place. And this is what I like about the show, is that the show starts technical, or it starts to talk about movie stuff, but then it goes off on its own thing. And this show becomes really a show about being a mom. Awesome. And it's really cool because I've never really heard a podcast about that yet. And my mom, who raised she was a stay-at-home mom that raised 4 kids. She really sort of addresses a lot of things about being a mother, and she talks about how she didn't want kids. She talks about how a lot of the pitfalls that young mothers get into, and there's a big part of that. I mean, obviously, I haven't been looking, but I feel like there's a big gap for that kind of content. And by the time the show finishes, it's a really powerful. I'll have to send it to you. It's a really powerful show by the end because she's a very strong person and a very strong feminist and a very strong mom. And I just sort of I'm riding along with her on the podcast, laughing.
Oh my goodness, I'd love to hear that. That's awesome. Please do send it to me.
Of course.
Now, so on your career, let's talk a little bit about that. Can you talk about maybe what was one challenge that you thought, oh goodness, how am I going to get over this? And how did you overcome it? What can you talk about? I don't want to say your lowest point, but maybe something where now you can look back and say that happened for a reason, and this is why, because now I'm better because of it.
I would say that if you decide to get into this business, be prepared for there to be a lot of highs and a lot of lows. And when you think you got it, and when you think you're on track, someone comes and sweeps the leg on you, and you go down to pretty low depths, and you just have to try to get used to this sort of wave that happens.
Right.
I've had a lot of lows. The head injury that I talked about was a pretty big low, but I use that as an influence and a reason to do something bigger and greater. And now I'm happy I had the head injury because I have a movie and a deal at Hollywood, right, and all that stuff that I would not have had if I didn't go through that experience. And you deal with it on set every day as a director. Mm-hmm. There's someone is always walking up to you to tell you to stop. Like someone is always going, it's done. Shut it off. You're done. Like someone is always coming up to you to do that. And the only moment of rest that I find is when I actually call action. Because when I call action, everybody shuts up and we look at this little monitor and I see a little bit of that scene happen, maybe a minute, maybe 30 seconds. And then you call cut, and then all of these people come, and it's like, the location has a problem, and this person broke their leg, and blah, 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 blah. And so you really sort of get yourself into this mode of, it's cool, let's go with it, let's ride with it, let's have this thing.
Right.
Let's just get through it.
Let's get it done, yeah.
But I don't know if I have any specific, I could talk techie specific stuff, but, one thing I've learned, or one thing I'm now learning, because I've spent most of my adult life obsessed with movies, and the actual need to make them. Mm-hmm. And most of my life is set up, like, I feel like there's a bunch of like keystones, and all the keystones of my 20s is like, hey, that's when I did this project, and that's when I did this project, and that's when I did this project. And so there's so much of my life sort of marked by projects. And now that I'm getting older, I'm like, it's more important for me to actually live my life and do this at the same time. And it helps that I have an amazing girlfriend who, yes, is the girl that tried to murder me on ice skates. Gina, who is also in the business. She's a fashion photographer.
Awesome.
And so we both have, it's a bad business plan for a couple. We both are in this, very unstable business. But it helps, man. And I really love enjoying life with her. I love experiencing things. She's one of the best people to experience situations with. And so it keeps me up when I'm down, because awesome. it does do this all the time.
So I could probably name some successes that I've seen so far, but in your mind, what are some of your greatest achievements?
Oh, okay. Well, it's all steps. So like, I think after I came home from film school and I put together an entire crew, and I made a short film that got me out to Sundance. That was a huge step.
Oh, wow.
And then that was like 2000, something like that. And then when I started a company and we were making music videos and winning awards on MTV, that was a big step. I think that more recently, 12 km, like 12 km, my short film is such a life-changing moment where I challenged myself. I made a movie in a language that I don't speak.
Wow.
And then brought it all together. It's beautiful. It's an amazingly gorgeous looking movie. Everybody that I show it to think it costs millions and millions of dollars, which if they ask me, I'd say, yeah, sure. But that has got me an agent. So I'm now repped by UTA.
Nice.
I have management now because of that movie. And I have been in every major production company's offices because of that movie. Like I've hung out in Michael Bay's offices. I've hung out at Sam Raimi's offices. I've hung out at Ridley Scott's offices. And one of them has decided that they're going to make 12 km. And that now I'm in this sort of like wave riding and waiting for that to happen, which is this long,
right,
drawn out game of patience.
Oh goodness, yeah.
But I have a feeling that it's going to kick, and when that happens, so
yeah.
So I don't know if I answered your question, but there's been
Yes, you did. In fact, that's the one I was thinking of. So I'm glad that you said it. And then now tell us. This is like the I love this question because I think it just kind of gives a sense of, where you've been and where you're going and what you think your future is. What would you tell your 21-year-old self about your future?
What would I tell my okay, so if I went back in time and I hung out, first off, this may sound arrogant, but I'm going to go with it. First off, I think that if I suddenly stepped out of like a DeLorean, like a time machine, like I drove down the street and I stepped out, the 13-year-old me would look at me and go, wow, this dude's cool. That's the first thing I think would happen. Like, wow, I've always wanted a beard. And I go, yeah. As soon as you grow it, it stays. It'll be with you for the rest of your life. But I would tell him that, like, look, keep reading comics. Keep loving movies. It will end up great. It will end up as good as you think it will. Don't do it like just no matter what anybody tells you, you're doing the right thing.
Awesome.
I think that's what I would tell them.
Yeah.
Well, if I went back 2 weeks from now and told 2 weeks ago, Michael, I'd go, you're f***ing everything up.
Oh my gosh. No. Now, on that note, for aspiring filmmakers, people that maybe have gotten their first camera, let's say, had a mother like yours where they were influenced by photography and now wants to kind of venture off into the world, what would you say to them? What would you say to the aspiring filmmakers, aspiring storyteller?
I would ask them why they want to do it. I think ultimately I'd go, okay, why do you want to do it?
Mm-hmm.
And because it is a bastard. Like the actual business angle of things are really difficult. It's very highly competitive right now. Mm. The industry is incredibly oversaturated with folks that are doing it. So I wouldn't sugarcoat a damn thing. Like you're going to have to fight. You're going to have to get into it. You're not going to get credit for what it is that you're doing sometimes. It's going to be an ugly crawl. So if you're doing it because you want to be that person that stands up on stage and goes, look, I did this, and that's the whole reason you're doing it, you're going to go insane because that literally lasts for maybe an hour. Wow. And if you make it something successful, maybe a week. But with the modern, like with how everybody processes entertainment, they literally swipe. And they're just like, okay, saw it. And you go through Instagram and do it. And you just sort of go through it, and you don't think about the 15-hour day that it took to get that one photograph, or the crew of people that it took to do that. So if you're in the business for justification or for gratitude, get out of it.
Right.
Like if you're in the business because you love to learn, if you're in the business because you love to hang out with folks, if you're in the business because you want to be a part of this romantic adventure, I joke about this all the time. When you put together a film set, it's almost like an old Western where you go around, you go, let's get Tim because he's an amazing gunslinger. And let's get Jane because, she's an amazing camera person. And so you bring these folks together and you sort of walk into this project that is usually incredibly intense, especially at an independent level where you're doing like 15-hour days and no one's sleeping. You're seeing the range of emotions from like super highs to absolute lows. And then you come out of there and you end up with lifelong friends.
Right.
Because of these experiences, because of these situations that you're put in that are more often than not the most surreal thing that you've ever seen. If that's why you're doing it and you don't care about money, somehow you're independently wealthy, then go nuts with it, because it's a lot of fun to do that stuff. And it's easier to do it when you're young.
Right.
And then as you start to get older, that's a whole other conversation. Like, what do you say to the people in their late 20s and early 30s that suddenly the agencies and folks aren't hiring because they're too expensive now? So it's an interesting conversation to have. I try to have it on my podcast. I try to be uplifting about it on my podcast.
Right.
That can be.
Well, you're, like you said, you don't sugarcoat it. You want to, bring them into the know. This is going to happen, and you're going to experience this, and you're going to, I mean, that's good. That's good parting words for everybody. Just know that if this is what you want to do, it's going to come with a lot of bumps and bruises and, everything with the territory. So be prepared. Like Mike said, be prepared for anything and everything.
I would agree. And you know what? I don't want to leave it on a downer, and I hope I didn't.
No.
But I think that at the end of the day, if you're obsessed and you love something, then it doesn't matter what I think. It doesn't matter what sort of advice anybody's going to give you. And if someone tells you not to do something, if someone gives you the warning of it, and you love this thing and it's your obsession, then take heed and learn from that warning, but keep pushing, keep throttling through it. Because at the end of the day, that's where the exciting stuff comes from. That's where the good movies come from, are from people that fight.
I agree. Great. Now tell us where we can follow you, Mike. Give us your social medias.
Sure. You can follow me on Instagram. I'm a visual guy, obviously, so Instagram is the place to be if you're visual. So you can follow me at Mike Pecci. That's my personal account where I talk about my films, I talk about the food that I eat. You see the adventures I go on, that kind of stuff. I have another Instagram for In Love with the Process. So that's at In Love with the Process Pod, Pod. And that's where you'll see a lot of posts about like how scenes are done, certain pieces of equipment that I think are cool, great actors, great actresses. And I interact with folks about the show specifically there. You can also go to my website, mikepecci.com, which will have everything on it. So you can go back through the catalog and see a lot of my old films. You can see music videos, all that sort of stuff. And if you want to get into the music videos more specifically, McFarland and Pesci is my company's website, where you can see the music docs and all the music films and all that. So yeah, I mean, I'm all over the place. I'm on the internet.
So I will have all his information in the show notes below. So everybody, if you want to check out his work and see, the life of Mike Pecci, do so. I'll have all that information below. Mike, thank you so much for being on the show, on my Annie Talk show. I truly appreciate it.
Annie, it's always a wonderful thing to talk to you. I've loved you since we met.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that's it, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Annie Talks and hearing about Mike Pecci and the life of a filmmaker, his thought process, and his passion for storytelling through his art. Be sure to check him out on social media, and I will have all the links in the show notes below. If you'd like to watch the 12KM trailer and the trailer Mike talked about titled This Ain't Normal, I will have those links in the show notes below as well. Now, before we sign off, if you aren't already subscribed to my podcast, I invite you to hit subscribe and be notified anytime we upload an episode. If you are already subscribed, thank you so much. I truly appreciate it. If you could all please rate and review my podcast, please leave a comment or two. It would really help me out, and it would also help others to find this podcast. You can follow me on all my social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. I will have all that information in the show notes below for you as well. And lastly, if you enjoy this podcast, please consider contributing to my Patreon page. Your contributions will help to further the vision and mission of Annie Talks so that we could produce more episodes like this one and many other types of episodes and topics. The Patreon page will also be included in the show notes below. Thank you all again for tuning in, and keep listening to Annie Talks.
Hi, this is Mike Pecci, filmmaker, director, photographer, and host of In Love with the Process. I am hanging out with Annie on Annie Talks.